So, with the win of the banned hippie case in Denver, and the judge not believing the cop's tale about marijuana drying out in the oven and the smoke drifting for 3 floors down into an alleyway, I was on my way. And I started getting referrals. Now, remember, we're dealing in the West in a lot of ways. Although Boulder was a rather sophisticated town, it had a lot of rich students there, a lot of students from all over. It sold more beer than just about any other college in the country. I guess Maury's at Yale sold more beer. It was quite cosmopolitan. However, the police force here was extremely law and order. It's a conservative town. It was a dry town with only 3-2 beer, no liquors being sold. And a lot of military complex and government functional projects or government projects being worked on in the area. In fact, a lot of the projects were classified projects for the government. For instance, the National Bureau of Standards, later NIST, was the institution that covered the whole personnel records of the Manhattan Project. So all of the scientists, engineers, janitors, etc., working on the Manhattan Project were covered under personnel records as doing innocuous work for the Bureau of Standards in weights and measurements, when in fact they were figuring out how to blow up the world. In any event, there was an institution in Boulder that did a lot of cartographic stuff for the Navy, and it was called National Oceanographic and Atmospheric Administration, or NOAA, and a lot of the scientists in NOAA were commissioned officers. That's where a lot of the mapping and underwater currents, things such as this, hydrographic information for the Navy was done. One of the underground cartographers was a Navy captain, soon to be admiral, named Snyder. And he was a fairly well underwater cartographer. And you needed underwater maps for submarines so they wouldn't crash into mountains and things such as this. In any event, his son was going to the University of Colorado, and there was some marijuana stashed in his locker room. And somebody mentioned it, and the police staked the locker out. And when he came to put on his gym suit in the locker, the police jumped at him, scared the hell out of him. He started running, and cops, doing what they like to do, started shooting at him. Well, in a college town where you have a bunch of rich college students, I don't think it's too wise to go shooting at the students, which is the reason for the town's existence. But that didn't seem to want to stop the Boulder police, who in my opinion had always been rather arrogant. In any event, they caught the kid. He had let a friend use his locker room, didn't know things were there, but that didn't matter either. They were going to prosecute anyway, because we had a district attorney that was very much for law and order. He is a Republican, curious guy. He was a big supporter of the local Boulder rodeo called the Powwow, and he'd been an FBI agent, grown up in New York, before settling in Boulder. And he walked around town wearing a Western hat, Western shirts, and cowboy boots, and didn't seem to understand why we natives used to think he was curious and made fun of him. But anyway, he was a good old boy and was part of the good old boy Eastern establishment here. And he was liked to be thinking of himself as a cowboy. And as an aside, my first case, criminal case that I was assigned to by the court was against this farmer in a sort of a rural subdivision who was charged with running livestock from its natural range. Apparently he had corn and a few other crops, and the neighbor's horse kept getting out of the fenced yard and eating the crops, so he drove it off and got arrested for driving the livestock off its natural range. Well, the prosecutor had no idea what a natural range was. A 35-acre plot would not be really classified as a natural range. Also, he didn't know that some states had fenced in and others had fenced out statutes. But I soon educated him, got the case dismissed. Anyway, the captain's son got arrested after being shot at and was up for prosecution. And the captain decided to fly into Boulder to attend his son's bond hearing. Now, he had been in port, hopped a military jet, he just got off a ship, went into Boulder, and he was supposed to have testified the next day in front of the Senate, but he had his military dress uniform on when he appeared in Boulder, and he marched right into the judge's chambers. And the judge had been a lieutenant junior grade in the Navy prior to going to law school. And as soon as the captain appeared, he stood up and saluted. And I remember the conversation because I was standing there, and the captain up for his admiral's stars looks at the judge and says, "Just what the hell kind of an outfit are you running here, where you're going around shooting at college students?" And just really read him the riot act for a while. And it mentioned in the conversation that he was commander of a nuclear submarine. And if he had a captain's mast for every sailor accused of smoking marijuana, he wouldn't have had a goddamn crew. It turned out this particular sailor was the next door neighbor to the local congressman, Don Brotzman, and he told Brotzman all about it. Brotzman was a friend of the Republican DA who heard from the congressman about how stupid it was and what bad press it was going to get, and that they shouldn't have cops shooting at college students, etc. Well, that's one of the few interesting cases I had in my career where I actually had a district attorney essentially begging me to let him dismiss a case against a client. But that's exactly what happened. And it was kind of interesting that should occur. But it showed that what I'm going to be talking about a lot in this series is the idea of proportionality. You know, the equity term was you don't shoot a mouse with a cannon. And that seems to be more what's going on now than it was back then, 50 years ago. There just needs to be some proportionality. You can stake people out. You can always arrest later if you know who they are. You can get warrants. You don't have to shoot them up and Rambo and do takedowns and injure people just to prove a point. That was before so much of law enforcement was public relations anyway. Now they perp march them and all this other kind of stuff in order to put on a show for the audience, so the audience thinks cops are doing what they're supposed to be doing rather than really ducking their responsibilities. Well, right about that time, there was another arrest. Psychedelics were sort of coming out then, and a client of mine took some mushrooms and was having a bad experience. Well, the press at that time was saying, let's treat this medically. There was a big war going on between whether drug use should be treated as a law enforcement or a medical problem. But they were trying to tell people if they had bad trips, go to the hospital and get treated. Well, the district attorney and the cops didn't like that idea. They figured it was a law enforcement problem. So they staked out the hospital. If anybody came in with a bad trip, they'd arrest them for using psychedelic drugs. And they even had a lot of the hospital staff recruited to call them if this occurs. Well, as luck would have it, my client was a son of a physician in South Dakota. And he had a bad mushroom trip, and since his father was a doctor and he knew about medicine, and he knew doctors were supposed to help and weren't cops, he went to the hospital to get a tranquilizer to come off the trip. Well, instead of getting the tranquilizer, the hospital called the Boulder police. The Boulder police came there, put him in handcuffs, took him to jail, and traumatized the hell out of him. And then prosecuted him for felonious possession of mushrooms. Well, we scheduled it for a preliminary hearing, and I got some expert witnesses testifying it was bad procedure and bad policy, and I got some of my policy wonks to also testify that way in court. And to this day, I think it was bad policy. In any event, the doctor that examined him was listed by the prosecutor as a witness to the offense of ingesting drugs. And they had to have a witness in order to charge it. Well, I subpoenaed him for the hearing, and the next thing I know, I get a bill for $500 for an expert witness fee. Well, I didn't call him as an expert witness. I had asked no expert advice or opinions from him. I just asked him to describe what happened and what was in his report. Well, the next thing happens is the local bar apparently had this deal worked out with physicians that since these were bad people anyway using drugs, that they should bill them for expert witness fees, which to my view is like rubbing salt in a wound. So you go to the hospital, get treated for a bad trip, the doctor rats you off, the cops come, they give you a ticket, he has to testify in court that there was a reason for you being arrested, and he was a state's witness, and after he testifies, then the defendant who gets convicted by the doctor's testimony gets to pay a $500 expert witness fee. Well, I just thought that was bullshit and refused to pay it. So we had another round of litigation there, which caused me to sort of be ostracized by other lawyers in town and also doctors because I wasn't playing along with the racket. But that's the good old days back in the 60s when all of this drug shit started. And I think it should be very much a part of the history, a historical record of the times, because that was where jurisprudence in this country really changed. The drug war changed everything. The drug war brought about a different system. It brought about the informant system. I truly believe it was used as a method to develop counter-psychological warfare or psychological warfare techniques on our own citizens. I'm absolutely convinced that it was used for counterinsurgency training. The marijuana users drug users of the 60s were generally anti-draft. They were progressive. They were the love generation. They preached love rather than violence. Uh, and they were looked at as insurgents. So all of the techniques that the government developed to fight the drugs was used to fight a counterculture. It was used to fight a cultural war against the youths of this country, against the people that were dissidents, the ones that had long hair and didn't disagree with the kill a commie for Christ philosophy of the Nixon administration. That is all for this episode. I hope you enjoy it. I would like your feedback. I'd like to have comments, criticisms, whatever. Feel free to do so. I try to answer each and every one's comments. If I'm going to continue this, I definitely am going to want to have some feedback to see whether I'm just wasting my time or actually doing something worthwhile. So please contact me or email me, write me, make comments on the page. Even if it's your stupid ass blew it or something like that, I don't really care. I just want to hear from you.